Jon Sopel joins me, co-host of Global's podcast, The News Agents. You've been talking, John, to Lucy Powell about giving her reaction to the budget.
So Lucy Powell is the very newly elected deputy leader of the Labour Party, and you'll remember that she was sacked as leader of the House because Keir Starmer had lost confidence in her and was furious with her. And then Angela Rayner goes, there has to be a leadership contest, and she's elected deputy leader. And so you're in this weird position now where the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, does not sit in the cabinet. But her influence in this budget, I think, has been significant. I think it was Lucy Powell's warning against breaking the manifesto and raising income tax that led to Rachel Reeves performing a pretty dramatic screeching U-turn with the smell of burning rubber and tyre marks on the road outside Downing Street. And I think that, and we speak to her on the News Agents, and she sounds bullish. This is a reassertion of old Labour. I mean, this is a Labour Party that has decided to tax more and spend more. And yet when you kind of argue and say, this is what the Labour Party is now, we interviewed the Treasury Minister yesterday, Torsten Bell, and I've heard Keir Starmer on today, and I've heard Rachel Reeves on today. It's like they don't want to accept that. Well, if this is what you are, lean into it. But it's not what they promised in the manifesto. It's not what they promised in the lead up to the general election. This is where they are now. You've got to own it.
How problematic is this going to be for a re-election? I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but for them to, Keir Starmer himself has spoken about the change strategy, if he has one, that he wants for the country is a 10-year project minimum. Are they going to get 10 years?
Well, if you're asking me where we sit now, does this Labour government get re-elected? The answer, and you just have to look at the polls, is absolutely not a chance. Can they turn it around? I think they've got to have a compelling story to tell. I think there has to be greater economic growth. But you look at what the Office for Budget Responsibility said yesterday in their sort of marking of this budget, and they said there is nothing that causes them to revise upwards their projections of growth as a result of the measures taken in this budget. So they've got a huge mountain to climb to turn this around. 3 years is a very long time away in the political fortunes of a government. A huge amount can happen. I think their communication of, if this is what the Labour government is now, and there are respectable arguments about why you should tax more and why you need to increase welfare spending, but I mean, they are on a course where the projection for how much is going on welfare spending is going up and up and up. Yeah. And if you haven't got economic growth to kind of balance this, then you're going to have to tax people
70
more.
billion plus by the end of this Parliament.
Yeah.
50 billion of that, state pension, triple lock, disability and sickness benefits.
Yes, and what we saw in the summer was the utter reluctance of a Labour government to do anything about it. I mean, the Labour government wanted to do something about it, and
reluctance or inability to do anything about
inability.
it. Yeah.
I mean, and I can't see at any point the Labour backbenchers voting for welfare cuts. And Lucy Powell was sort of dancing around this issue when we interviewed her. And, she says, look, you've got to reform by all means, and there's got to be changes, and it might sometimes costs more to introduce reforms. But would she back welfare cuts? Would any Labour MP back welfare cuts? I frankly doubt it. And so, therefore, you're going to be heavily dependent on economic growth to do this. And remember, in the manifesto, Keir Starmer told us that he wanted Britain to be the fastest growing economy in the G7. Well, that still seems some way off. Growth was going to be the number one mission of this Labour government.
But the word I keep thinking about when they talk about growth is abracadabra. They think they can just magic it up. Or they know it can't be magicked up, but they speak as though it can be magicked up. Because if that growth doesn't come in meaningful numbers, then this is a mess.
Well, I think it becomes politically more risky for Keir Starmer, because the longer this goes on and Labour languishing,
the less effective he looks.
Yeah, and the more that Labour backbenchers will think, well, OK, let's see how we do in next May's local council elections. And if it's really rough, well, let's get rid of him as Prime Minister and we'll put someone else in. And, and Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' fates are intertwined. They want to see that off. But I don't see at the moment what turns around Labour's fortunes in terms of public opinion.
And it was interesting to, if you think of the audiences that she was speaking to yesterday, the various audience she was speaking to yesterday, one of them was clearly business. And depending on which businesses you're talking about, they will have been pleased or displeased. But an awful lot of small, medium-sized businesses in this country, backbone of our economy, were not pleased with that. The JP Morgans of this world might have been, because they didn't get heavily taxed extra, but ordinary UK businesses weren't pleased.
Well, no, they won't be pleased, and they see that there aren't the measures there, and there are some big measures that Labour are taking. You hear about these big projects, the big infrastructure kind of projects. The extra runway at Heathrow Airport or whatever it happens to be. These are big things that will generate economic growth. I mean, so for example, the increase in defence spending is going to create more jobs, and that will create more growth. But these are things that are felt 3, 5, 10 years down the track. But you've got the economic kind of things that maybe generate growth in 5 years' time. But there is a political timetable now which is ticking. And it's not ticking well for Labour in the sense that they are in a parlous position in the polls. And unless they can show something demonstrable and say, look, this is the fruits of what we have planted, then I think that, Starmer and Reeves are still in some trouble.
And all the while with the left breathing down their neck.
All the while
literally in Parliament.
The left feeling very buoyant and feeling much more like they've got the party back now. So you've got, as I say, a high spend, high tax Labour Party, but without the economy growing. So you've got to grow the size of the cake, and the cake seems to be pretty much the same size as it was.
I'm joined by Lord Jim O'Neill. Lord O'Neill, former chief economist at Goldman Sachs, former Treasury Minister, was also an advisor to Rachel Reeves. You know she is. When the Labour Party were in opposition. Well, she's not in opposition now, is she, Jim O'Neill?
No, she's not. Before you go too much further down this path, as I always like to say, I am a crossbencher.
I know you are.
So I'm independent
of
these political parties.
And let me ask you then, was it a budget yesterday for business?
I think it was a ho-hum for everybody, to be honest. I mean, obviously there's little bits and pieces that vaguely interesting, but from a big picture perspective, especially given this sort of weird modern game of leaking and trailing everything, it was kind of like, okay, is that it?
Really? What would have been the opposite of ho-hum?
Well, as I picked up some of your chat with John about, I mean, they came into power seemingly guns blazing, 5 missions, we're going to have the highest growth in the G7. A lot of whether they can do that or not is out of their control because it's the other countries. But, with the inherent, we're going to do stuff to get it. But, the OBR revised down their forecast for the next 5 years. And the OBR didn't raise their forecasts at all because of anything they did. And it's not surprising because they didn't really do anything other than come up with a whole set of initiatives that they think would keep their political stability inside the Labour Party and be delivered in a way that would convince the bond markets that they're, whatever else is going on, they're committed to the fiscal rule, which they did that.
22 billion headroom.
Yeah, they kind of did that reasonably well, but is that the purpose of being in government? People voted them in, I think. I'm not a political expert,
for
because
change.
they'd had enough of what was there for change and wanted something better. And there are, as I'm sure we'll get into, there are 3 or 4 or 5 really big things that it seems to me pretty obvious that one of our political leaders is going to have the boldness to say to all 65 million of us, enough of this kidology. We've got to do something about the triple lot. We've got to do something about welfare payments. We've got to do something proper about property tax reform. We've got to stop pouring money into the NHS unless there is productivity improvements. Where do you want to go? I mean, I don't know why they didn't do it. Yes, they can't do any of that because of this manifesto stuff, but if you look at the margin, other political leaders are starting to say, well, no, maybe we can't, keep the commitment to the triple lot. So.
Conversations that were unhavable are starting to be havable, is what you're saying. Yeah. I was going to ask you, but you've in a sense answered the question or partly anyway in what you've just said. Is it that they lack ideas, or is it that they lack courage?
I don't know what it is, because and they're going to probably be, if they can be bothered hearing anything I say, they're going to be quite annoyed with me because I like Rachel personally, and I've got a lot of respect for her, and I know her advisors, and I don't know what it is. I think there's almost maybe a bit of lack of self-confidence still going on. What is it, 18 months after being elected? And then there's obviously an enormous amount of constraint coming from number 10, which might be the biggest dilemma that the Chancellor herself has got because of the political madness of the past few weeks. So she couldn't do anything she actually really wanted to do. But, with the people that got around them, especially now with Torsten Belmore involved and Manouche, and people that they speak to privately, they've got plenty of people giving them plenty of ideas, and they have some themselves.
What do you mean specifically about those constraints from number 10? Because I would have thought the constraints that she was feeling, and perhaps number 10 are feeling as well, is the backbenchers behind them in the Commons there and the left of the body. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I think it's a bit more than that because, and I've sort of been overseas, so I've missed some of the day-to-day blows of this, but the whole, I was around before I went for the sort of what I call the wartime 8-10 in the morning emergency briefing.
3 weeks ago, yeah.
I'm like, well, you only do that when there's something pretty dramatic going on, and that was clearly done to tell us that they were going to break the manifesto pledge.
Yeah.
And then because they claim the OBR suddenly found 10 billion that they didn't have to actually raise income tax, so they decide they're not going to do it. What does that tell you about the purpose and ambition of a government? What is it you're actually really trying to pull off, rather than just massaging numbers all the time?
Is there just no strategy?
Well, it comes over that way. But I quickly add that, I know, because I've talked to them a lot, there's plenty of people that talk to them, and it occasionally feels like there is, and it's just waiting to come out, and then every time there's an opportunity, it doesn't.
The whole question of whether, the reason I began by saying was this a budget for business, is that I've been inundated with calls for the last few weeks from small business owners, small, medium-sized enterprises, they're called SMEs, really feeling down in the dumps and fearful that the kind of things that were announced yesterday would be announced yesterday, worried about the workers' rights bill, that kind of thing. You keep tabs on how the North and Northwest, Northeast is doing.
Extremely involved in it.
Yeah, I know, that's why I wanted to bring it in, because the last time we spoke, it was a while ago now, but the last time we spoke, you were saying there were some indications there of growth, of movement, of optimism. Is that still there?
Here's another area which is equally frustrating, if not more. The second fiscal rule that didn't get much attention yesterday, which is all about being allowed, because of how they've chose it, to boost public investment spending more and not be constrained by the current budget rule, which I think I was publicly acknowledged by the Chancellor in having a role in creating. Why was there no focus on that? If you really want to get higher growth, whether it relates to the regions or the country, why aren't you really, trying to do something about it?
Well, she talked about the transport investment, didn't she? Yeah.
I think it got a vague mention.
Yeah.
But there has been...
It was all rail. That was it.
6 times this year where it was supposedly imminent, something was going to happen, and it just nothing ever happens. And so a lot of people in the North, particularly about the connectivity, and I'm very much one of those people that think east-west in the North is of multitudes more important than HS2 ever could have been. So it's very important for improving the connectivity and really creating an agglomeration between Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield and so on.
Don't leave Liverpool.
What's going on? Yeah. Now, that said, another part of me that's frustrated is because there is growing, since I last saw you, the evidence about the Northwest and Manchester in particular, but also, interestingly now, and I didn't talk to you about this, pockets of Yorkshire, here's a question for you on your audience. You could do a little game this afternoon.
Go on, I love a game.
Which single borough in England showed the highest productivity improvement over the past 20 years?
I'm guessing it's in Yorkshire.
Correct, because I gave you a steer.
You did. Headingley.
Rotherham. Who would have thought?
Given all the negative news around Rotherham, obviously.
And it's because there's something called the Advanced Manufacturing Centre that literally sits on the geographic border of Sheffield and Rotherham. But because it's employed more and more people in advanced manufacturing and doing quite well, and they earn good money, the way that translates into the average for the borough of Rotherham shows a very significant improvement.
Because what comes with that is types of house buying, moving, spending.
Yes, all those
mobility,
kind of things.
Yeah.
And if you look at the detailed data on that, 6 of the 10 best improving boroughs over the past 20 years are in the north. Now, they all come from very low... I wouldn't want anybody to misunderstand. They come from very low bases, and so the absolute difference of welfare, wealth, and all the rest of it between there and here...
But an upward trajectory is what you want to be seeing.
The gap's closing, and some of them, especially on big places, Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester has grown 3 times as fast as London the past 20 years. Partly because London's struggled post-international crisis. But these are important things that a focused government would be like, well, actually, that's a policy that
Why is
works.
that happening? Let's get more of that.
Why aren't we going to do more of whatever it is that's driving these places?
And when it comes to the north, we talked there about the big infrastructure transport promises and all of that. Beyond transport, are you seeing any positives there?
Well, the other thing, I'm going to end up being a bit of self-promotion here, but I chair something called Northern Gritstone as well, which is probably the most fun thing I do, which is investing in startups coming out of northern universities. Leeds, Sheffield, Liverpool, and I used to link to the beginning of the Northern Powers.
Great universities.
Manchester, Leeds, Pool. And it's brilliant science and ideas coming out of these universities. And we have investment money that backs them and helps them scale. And it's very, very stimulating and rewarding. And we need way more of that. Since Gritstone got going, we have been in the centre of meaning that there's something, multitudes, and it's very small amounts, multitudes of money being put into these things compared to what happened before we existed. And in the big scheme of things, it's tiny amounts. But these universities are world-class universities.
What you're describing there is a model that gets activity going.
Yeah. Because you want to create new companies with value, a bit like what I said about the Advanced Manufacturing Centre, new things with high value-added jobs that not only encourage smart people, aspirational young people from there, want to stay there. Who knows? You might encourage a load of other people to actually go there.
And let's go back to where we began, really. The ideas thing, the courage thing. If they don't get the courage to do the bold things on welfare, or they're unable to because of their backbenchers, or to do the bold thing on triple lock or on property, what will that do to the country, do you think, regardless of who wins next time round?
It's a really interesting question, because I part of my mind today I'm kind of like, I feel sort of quite down, because I'm kind of like, what is it with our current state of democracy here that whoever happens to be in power just ends up playing this sort of game where nobody really wants to do anything of substance?
Sclerotic.
I mean, you get people with my background in a room, and we might disagree about some important details, but what I find interesting is there are more and more people that are aware of these things that kind of think it is inevitable that we cannot carry on with this triple lock forever. One of the other things that I only realised late last night, that they've tightened up on the student loan repayments, making it worse, tougher on students. And yet these same young people are the ones that are going to be facing increasing taxes to pay for the remarkably generous things
that they probably won't,
all pensioners,
and that they won't probably get themselves when they're that age.
Right. And it's like, how can that be right? How can it be right that nearly 1 million people are claiming all 4 welfare payments, and as a result of it earn £3,000 a year more than the minimum wage? How can that make sense? And how can we have these crazy system of property taxes that have gone on through many governments that make our property market so chaotic?
And all they came up with was the so-called mansion tax.
And they come up with the so-called mansion tax, which is clever politics, hardly going to raise any money. So, what is the point about that, other than a few left-wing backbenchers can say, oh, great,
and it can be thrown around.
We're being Labour.
And it can be thrown around in studios like this as taxing the rich.
It's kind of bonkers.
Well, I hope you feel more positive about things next time we talk. You were quite positive the last time we spoke,
I'm very positive about what's going on in pockets of the north. And, I'm glad you raise it again, because to end on a positive note, that gives me some hope that those places that get control of their own destiny a bit more, and have the right model and the right persistence and the right persuasive abilities to get business about
can be
them,
very productive.
they can change what's going on.
Yeah.
And, it has been a bit enabled by the fact London's not done so well, but if you look at the numbers really closely, particularly Greater Manchester and these pockets of Yorkshire, they are doing better than they were. And you wouldn't think about that when you look at the national data.